Arlie.
Hey.
Hey.
Hi. Hey, buddy. Hi there. Hi.
Oh my God.
Think Daddy's home.
You're on groomed. Oh, and back. Oh, he is.
Who is that?
Hey, I want to just begin by thanking all of our military personnel, past, present, and future. Those of you who are serving in the military or have served, we just want to thank you, man. It's just awesome. You're the one that keeps our country free and, you know, gives us the ability to do the things we do today. You know, it really breaks my heart when I see people that are, you know, burning the flag and all those different kind of things. I don't think if they just put a draft in and drafted everybody, you know, so you get a taste of what that's like, it probably would make a lot of difference in our country today. But man, thank you guys. It's all of you. It's really, really awesome. For those of you who are live here at Grace Life, the El Paso campus, just want to welcome you. Glad that you're with us today, as well as all of those who are viewing us online around the United States, as well as literally all over the world. Actually, this is our final week in our series called God's Best Friend. And the reason I've called it that is pretty obvious, I think, at this point, I hope, because, well, we'll be talking about that in a minute. As you already know, we've been taking a rather in-depth look at the word worship. And what worship is, what it includes, what it doesn't include, all those different kind of things, because all of us have ideas about what worship is, what it's about, you know, what's included in worship, how you're supposed to worship, all those different kind of things. And what we've been doing, we've been studying a conversation between Jesus and that Samaritan woman at the well, at Jacob's well. And in that conversation between Jesus and that woman at the well, Jesus talked more about worship there than he probably did in any other place in the Bible. We find a lot of things about worship. So what we've discovered so far, let me just kind of bring you up to speed, and then we'll go on from there. And this, of course, this being our final day, we're just going to kind of wrap it all up. So what we've discovered so far is that worship does not include a lot of the things that maybe a lot of us think that it may have included up to this point. A lot of people in our world think that worship includes a lot of different things, and we often think there's things like you know, certain songs or certain music or certain things that you must do in church that you know, include worship. We've also discovered that where you worship is not important. That really doesn't make any difference. As a matter of fact, I'll say again, like I often do, is that is that even though we call this a church, this just is a church. This is just a building where we meet. The Bible says that you all are the church. We are the church, and so this is just a building where we meet. Doesn't matter, you know, whether it's here or somewhere else or in a garage or somebody's house. Doesn't matter. Where you worship is not important, because remember the woman at the well said, well, listen, you Jews think that Jerusalem is a place to worship, but we Samaritans know that, you know, Mount Gerizim is the place to worship, so what do you say? And Jesus said, listen, it's not important. It doesn't matter where you worship. Where you worship is not important. We've also discovered that worship is not about how you worship. Because a lot of us have these ideas, especially those of us who have grown up in church or a religious setting of any kind. A lot of times we have some preconceived ideas about how worship is to be done and what things are included in worship. Such as, you know, a lot of times we think that, you know, getting baptized or joining the church or observing communion or Lord's Supper, whatever you call it, are things that God requires of true worshipers. But as a matter of fact, when it comes to the bottom line of what worship is, Jesus simply says that an hour is coming and now is when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For such people, or that's what God is actually looking for, the Father seeks, is to be his worshipers. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Okay, so how many of you remember, last week we talked about, those of you here, how many of you remember what the original Greek word for worship means? How many remember that? Okay, it actually means literally to kiss, but it's much deeper than that. And that's why I showed you this little video clip to begin with, and it was appropriate because there's military personnel coming home. Is that it's to kiss or to lick the hand like a dog licks his master's hand. That's really what the word worship means. It means to kiss or to lick the hand like a dog licks his master's hand. Literally, the literal Greek word literally means like a dog licks its master's hand. Okay. So we also talked about the idea of, or the question of pre-thought, which has a lot to do with our worship in this day and time, or the ideas that we bring with us about worship, what we think worship includes, how you're supposed to worship, all that kind of stuff has that idea of pre-thought, that you've got to do certain things or all that kind of stuff. Those kind of things are involved. So with the idea, with the fact that the word worship literally means like a dog licking his master's hand. If those of you have dogs or have had dogs or whatever, you know that when you come home from a long day's work, or maybe you've been gone on a trip or whatever, that's what your dog does. They're excited to see you. You know, they just all like, and when I get home after a day's work and my dog meets me at the gate, well, actually, he's usually in the house sleeping or something. You know, I run a radio for him so they don't get lonely, my dog and my cat. And so when he hears when I click the clicker for the pickup, and the horn goes beep, he's out the door and around the house. He's coming to see me at the front gate. And I'm telling you, he just jumps and, and squeals and runs around and turns circles and, and all those kind of things, and licks your face and licks your hand, and you get down there to pet him and he acts like he's going to lick your face off, all those different kind of things. As a matter of fact, I told you about a few weeks ago or a little while back when I was gone to North Dakota to do a wedding up there, and when I came home and walked in the front door and he was still just jumping up and down, and he peed all over the floor. He was just so happy that I was home. He thought I was never coming back. Just awesome. So the question is that, well, have you ever wondered why they do that? Why your dog does that? I started to wonder. I told you last week. I started to wonder that maybe just maybe it's a bribe. Maybe he's bribing me. Maybe he's just doing that so that I'll give him a steak and potatoes and white gravy for supper instead of nasty old dog food, right? Have you ever wondered that? Well, of course not. Of course not. You know better. Well, first of all, you know better because they don't have that capacity within their brain, I don't think, necessarily. But mostly because they're just happy to see you. They don't care whether you even feed them or not, or they have water or not. They're just glad to see you. That's all there is to it. They're just so happy to see you that that's all that matters, because you are the center of their world, and that's what that's all about. Okay? So that's exactly Jesus' point here when he says that God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Because the original word worship means to lick the hand like a dog licks his master's, or to kiss, or to lick the hand like a dog licks his master's hand. So that's what he's talking about. That's exactly the point is that like your dog comes in and he's so happy to see you that you are the center of his world, and that's all that matters. That's what worship is about. Okay, so today we're going to be taking a quick look at a couple of places in the New Testament where the Bible specifically says, speaking of people, and they worshipped him. Okay? Because those places, and there are lots of places like that, that it says, and they worshipped him. And so what I want to do is just take a look at those places and see what's involved then with a lot of the preconceived ideas that we have about worship. Let's see what worship is about. Let's see what the Bible talks about as far as worship when it says, and they worshiped him. What were they doing? What did they say? Did they do anything in particular to worship Jesus? What was their worship style like when the Bible says, and they worshiped him? Understand? Okay, so let's begin. Let's just jump right in. Matthew chapter 2, after it talks about after traveling probably as much as 2 years, the Magi arrived in Jerusalem, and they were looking for Jesus. They were looking for this one who was to be born King of the Jews. And they said, "For we saw his star in the east, and we know he's supposed to be here somewhere. We've come to worship him." Okay, so they came for the purpose of worshiping Jesus, called the Christ, that they knew was to be born somewhere in that vicinity. They've been following that star for probably 2 years. Now, of course, no one there knew the answer to their question. Nobody really knew the answer to their question. They were asking everybody they could find, where is this guy? Where is this Jesus that's supposed to be born, that is to be born or had been born, King of the Jews? And so nobody knew the answer to that. However, when Herod got wind of what the question was, and when he heard that they were searching for this one who is to be born King of the Jews, well, that set off a light bulb in his head. Because in that day and time, the kings, they would even kill their own sons to keep them from, overthrowing them and taking over the throne, those kinds of things. So he was really in a big dither. He was really in a big worry because he didn't want anybody coming in and taking over as King of the Jews, that was to be born King of the Jews and those kind of things. So he immediately called the chief priests and the scribes and those people in, and he asked them, "Where is this guy who is this man to be born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east. We've come to worship him," right? So they're asking, Herod is asking the chief priests and the scribes, what can you tell me about this? Who is this guy? Where is he to be born? I want to know all about this. Of course, what he said was he wanted also to be able to worship him himself. That was a lie. We know that. We know he was lying. We know that the reason he was trying to find out was so he could kill him instead. So what they said then, what the Magi said was, they said, "Well, in Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what has been written by the prophet." And they went on to quote the prophets in the Old Testament saying that Jerusalem or Bethlehem was where he was to be born. So you probably already know the rest of the story, is that the Magi made the trip to Bethlehem, and they found Jesus and his mother in the house. And so there they were. They arrived at the house where Jesus was, probably closer to 2 years old. We talked about that before, that he probably was closer to being 2 years old. A lot of things that are involved there that kind of indicate that. For instance, like Herod killed all the children, all the boy babies from 2 years old and under. The Magi had been traveling for probably that long. Not only that, but he was in a house. He wasn't in, like we see the nativity scenes at Christmas time. We're getting close to Christmas. We're going to start seeing those nativity scenes that seem to indicate that it was a brand new baby, had just been born, those kind of things. That's probably not the case. So look at what Matthew says in Matthew chapter 2 and verse 11. It says, "After coming into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell to the ground and they worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they presented to him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh." All right. So what we need to do then is we need to ask an important question at this point. What did the Magi say when they found Jesus? I mean, maybe I say it a different way. What words did they use in their worship of Jesus? What words did they use? I know you got that confused look on your face because they didn't say anything, right? They didn't say anything. It just simply says that they fell to the ground and they worshipped him. Okay? So there's an indication there, and we'll look at another place. But what we find there is that they fell to the ground and they were, and there's a lot of places in the Bible that says it. I was hoping to be able to get through a few more, but we're not going to have time for that today. But where they worshipped him, and then it just stops there. As a matter of fact, it was a little bit, you know, there's a lot of times in my life when I wish the Bible said more, you know. In this particular case, I think, well, in all cases, of course, but in this case, that's all there is to say. There isn't anything more to say about that idea, that fact, what worship is. They fell to the ground and they worshiped him. So, what does that tell us about what we often consider to be worship? I mean, does worship necessarily include words of praise or music or preaching or, you know, any of those things? Well, actually, no. Those may be byproducts of worship, certainly. But it doesn't seem to be that's what worship is in and of itself, because true worshipers worship the Father in spirit and in truth, which really has, in its essence, has nothing at all to do with words or music or preaching or any of those kinds of things. On the other hand, there is a popular idea in our day and time, and it's probably been a popular idea for many, many years, and that worship also includes a lot of different other things, right? Well, I mentioned some of those earlier. In this particular case, and what we see here is that one of the ideas about worship is that worship includes the giving of your money or tithing to God, right? And so what we see here was that the Magi, when they came and they do those things, it says they brought their gifts. You know, when I was a kid, and of course I grew up in church, my dad was a pastor, and that's why I swore when I was a young adult that I would never be a pastor myself. Yeah, just tell God you won't do something, right? Anyway, so when I was a kid, and of course, you know, in church and every Sunday they would take up the offering at some point in time. Well, we don't take up the offering here in that way. We've got a box in the back. If you want to give, please give. If you don't want to give, then don't. I mean, it's just simple as that. We just trust God to meet our needs and those kind of things, so we don't worry about that. But when I was a kid, and there's still a lot of places that do that, to pass an offering plate, maybe some of the places even pass it more than once during the worship time or during a morning preaching service, what are those kind of things might be. But every time that would happen, or a lot of times when that would happen, somebody in the congregation or my dad or somebody would say, well, let's worship God in our giving or with our giving. The idea is that giving is worship. At least that's the idea I got. Okay? That worship includes giving your money. That if you really want to worship God, then you need to give your money to God. Well, the question is that true? Is that what the Bible says? Is that what the Magi did? The wise men did here in this particular incident when they came, and they came from 2 years, traveling for 2 years, brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Is that what they were doing? Was that part of their worship? Was giving, was that a part of their worship? Did they worship Him in that way? Is that what worship is? Well, a lot of people will assume that that's the case. And can we assume that that's what they were doing, is giving gifts because that was an integral part of their worship? Well, look again at what Matthew says, and let's check that out. After coming in the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they fell to the ground and they worshipped him. Period. Okay? Then, well, what does "them" tell you? That's an afterword, right? That's a word that means that something happened after that. They fell to the ground, they worshipped him. Then, after they had done that, after they had worshipped him, then they opened their treasures. And opening their treasures, they presented to him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So they certainly did give him gifts. They did. And they may have done some other things as well. The Bible doesn't say. But from this particular passage, we can tell that when they fell to the ground, they worshipped him. That was the worship part. The gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh came afterwards. It was not integral in the sense that giving of your money is, or if you're a true worshiper of God, you must give your money or your gifts to God. So worship came first, and then the gifts, and were something that they more along of something they wanted to do. It was a byproduct, certainly, in that case, in that sense of the word, a byproduct of worship, but I don't believe that it was worship in itself. Worship is different than that. As a matter of fact, if that's what we think worship is, we've probably got the wrong idea about worship. Because that's what has brought us down the road of, in religion, is down the road of this is what worship is, or this is what worship includes. And you've got to do these things and not do those things, and all those different kind of things that come into play there. So they gave him these gifts as a result or as a byproduct of their worship, but it was something they wanted to do because of who he is, not the actual worship itself, if I can say it in that way. Okay, John chapter 8. Jesus had just escaped a near-death experience because he had slipped out of the temple. He had been in the temple, and he'd been talking about the fact that he is the Messiah who was to come. The Pharisees understood that. They knew that he was, or he knew he was the Messiah. They were questioning that fact, and since he claimed to be the Messiah who was to come, they were pretty upset about that fact because for them that was considered to be, for the Jews, that was considered to be outright blasphemy, because claiming to be the Messiah meant that he claimed to be God himself. And that offense in itself, blasphemy, was worthy of stoning. They were going to stone him to death. So he had just escaped that. Okay? And then the Bible goes on to tell us that in verse 1, that as he passed by, okay, he just escaped the temple. He's probably walking down the street somewhere. I don't know. He slipped their notice. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? And Jesus answered, it was neither that this man sinned, nor his parents. That wasn't the issue. It wasn't that somebody had sinned, that's what's caused him to be born blind. But it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. All right. So Jesus comes by. I think you probably know the story. I wanted to just kind of get you started there. You probably know the story that Jesus, on that particular day, and if you know the story, it was actually on a Sabbath day, which really caused more problems, not less. Jesus spit on the ground and he made clay. Now for the Jews, that was considered to be working on the Sabbath. So Jesus is really, he's looking for trouble, you know, claimed to be the Messiah. Then he goes out and he works on the Sabbath and he heals the guy, you know, to make it really obvious that that's what he did, all those different kind of things. Well, he told the guy then after he applied the clay to this guy's eyes, because, well, making clay was considered to be work. You can't work on the Sabbath. They had all kinds of laws and rules and regulations about that stuff, including the fact that if you were a tailor, a guy who fixed clothes, mended clothes, made clothes, if you walked out of your house, this is part of the Jewish tradition, if you walked out of your house on the Sabbath day with a needle stuck in your robe, you were working. And you had violated the Sabbath and you were in big trouble. Okay? They were that serious about all that kind of stuff. So Jesus Jesus applied the clay to this man's eyes, and he told him, he said, now go wash in the pool of Siloam. Okay. So as the man did as Jesus had instructed him, certainly we already know that his sight was returned and he was able to see. That was the miracle that Jesus did within his life. Well, almost immediately, the Pharisees began asking this man who was born blind. They had probably known him for probably all his life. They knew he was born blind. You know, he had never seen him before in his entire life. And they began asking him, saying, well, how in the world did you get to see? You know, how did you receive your sight again? What happened here? What's going on? Right? And he said, well, he, speaking of Jesus, applied clay to my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Okay, cool. Right? Simple statement. That's what happened to me. If that had happened to you, what would you say? If Jesus came, you had been born blind, Jesus spit on the ground, made some mud, put it on your eyes, you went to wash, and you could see again, and somebody asked you what happened, you tell them this. This guy called Jesus, he put clay on my eyes. I went and washed in the pool, and I can see. End of story. Well, as usual, the Pharisees then came to the conclusion that Jesus couldn't possibly be from God. Now, you remember, he had just come from the temple claiming to be the Messiah. And now they're saying, well, he can't possibly be God because he sinned. Not only did he sin by working on the Sabbath, by making clay, but now he's healed a man and all those other different kind of things, right? So, verse 16. Therefore, some of the Pharisees were saying, this man is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. Well, he worked on the Sabbath. But others were saying, well, how can a man who is a sinner perform such signs? And there was a division among them. So there was a difference of opinion. Some of them said, well, wait a minute, how can he perform such a great miracle if he is a sinner? The others said, no, he has to be a sinner because he worked on the Sabbath and he healed his man, all those different kind of things, right? But some of them were really upset. Some of them were saying, well, maybe there's room for question here. So what's really happening here is that the man whom Jesus had healed, now here's what you need to understand, is that the guy that Jesus had healed of his blindness, had been born blind all his life, this man actually was now caught in the middle of an argument between the Pharisees and Jesus. That's really what's happening. He's caught in the middle. And not necessarily about being healed of his blindness, but about who is Jesus? Who is this guy, right? So ultimately, John tells us, beginning verse 35, that Jesus heard that they had put him out of the temple, and finding him, he said, do you believe in the Son? This is the man who's been born blind, right? And finding him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? And he answered, well, who is he? Remember, he's blind. Jesus had healed him. Never seen Jesus before. Never seen Jesus before. Didn't have a clue as to who he was. So Jesus finds the guy, and he says, listen, do you believe in the Son of Man? Well, and he asked, well, who is he, that I may believe in him? And Jesus said to him, you have both seen him, and he is the one who is talking with you. And he said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. Period. Another period at the end of, and he worshiped him. Never having seen Jesus, didn't even know who he was when Jesus walked up to him and started talking to him. And Jesus says, not only have you seen him, because I'm him, I'm standing here right here. Now, I'm him. And the man said, I believe. I believe you are who you say you are. And he worshiped him. Again, I'm going to ask you that same stupid question. What words did he use when he worshiped God, when he worshiped Jesus? He didn't. There are no words listed there. Did he give him gifts? No. No. Did he bring an offering? No. There's nothing more that is said about that, about his worship, than simply that he worshiped him. He didn't say anything. He didn't give him anything. He didn't do anything other than he worshiped him. So, a lot of times in our day and time, I can tell you that as a pastor, I visit a lot of people in the hospital, those kind of things. In years past, I've had a lot of people say things, well, if God will just get me out of this illness, I'll serve him every day and I'll go to church every Sunday. I think you already know the end of that story, is that once they get out, they're okay. And it's kind of like I had a leaking roof one time. And, when it would start leaking, the problem was it was raining and I couldn't fix the roof. And then when it wasn't raining, it wasn't leaking, so I didn't need to fix it. That's kind of how we do with God a lot of times, though, isn't it? is that we promise God a lot of things, and so that God will get us out of trouble. But once we're out of trouble, then we don't need God anymore because He got us out, same as the leaky roof. So this guy didn't do any of those kinds of things either, like promise God that he would go to church every Sunday from now on, or that he would bring a tithe into the storehouse of God at his earliest convenience, or any of those kind of things. The Bible just simply says, and he worshiped him. Now you've got to keep in mind then what worship is, the original Greek word for worship. Because if you don't keep that in mind, then that becomes a very confusing kind of thing to say, and he worshiped him. So, just like the Magi, he believed that Jesus is who he says he is. As a matter of fact, the reason the word worship means to kiss, like a dog licking his master's hand, is because to your dog, you are the center of his world. Are you not? You're the center of his world. Nobody else matters. Nothing else matters. Only you. Meaning that to worship in spirit and in truth is something that must come from the heart. More specifically, something that comes from the heart, from a heart that knows that Jesus is who he says he is. Like this man that says, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. Just like your dog saying, you're the center of my world. There's no question about that. When we know that Jesus is the center of our world, worship is there. It doesn't necessarily take words or actions of any kind. As a matter of fact, it doesn't take words or actions of any kind. It's just simply knowing that he is the center of your world. I'm going to end right there. I don't want to muddy the waters of what true worship is by going into some deep theological lesson on what it means to worship God in spirit and what it means to worship God in truth or any of those kind of things, because they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. That's the case here with me. I don't know any way to say it. I really don't. Because for me, the original Greek word for worship, meaning to kiss or to lick the master's hand, is such an amazingly descriptive word picture in and of itself. If you own a dog, you know what I'm talking about. That picture in and of itself is so descriptive that no amount of words on my part could ever say it better. So to worship God in spirit and in truth can only come from a heart that is simply in love with Jesus and where Jesus is the very center of your world. There isn't anything more that can be said. That's what worship is. And they worshiped him. Nothing about money. Nothing about going to church. Nothing about doing the Lord's Supper. Nothing about being baptized. Nothing about joining the church. Nothing about reading your Bible. It's about knowing that Jesus is who he says he is, making him the very center of your world. God's awesome. And he is definitely worthy of our worship. Lord bless you all. Amen. Good God.